Hello YouTubers and welcome to a new video from Riverside X Studios. This video is my top 5 tips for getting the right kick sound and having it sit well in your mix. So first and foremost, and tip number 1 will be selecting the right kick sound. For the purpose of this tutorial, I will be making a quick 4-bar loop and I'll be using the Vengeance Essential House Volume 1. So when you're selecting a kick, it is important to select a good kick from the get-go. The reason why I say this is, if you select a kick which doesn't have the correct frequencies that you're looking for, and then afterwards you start boosting frequencies to get extra bass, this won't actually sound as good, or may not sound good at all if you was to find a bass sound, or kick rather, that sounds good from the actual sample itself. So I'm working in Logic right now, and what I'm going to do is on my stereo out, I'm going to open up something that I use, and it's totally free, and it's by Voxengo, and it's called Span. Span is a great tool as it allows you to monitor quite a number of things, but for the purpose of this tutorial we are going to be using it as a frequency analyzer. So I'm going to create like a basic house groove here, and I'm looking for a kick which has a nice frequency response in the bass region or sub-bass region, so anywhere between 60 to 80 Hertz and below. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this open up here, and I'm going to go into hard kicks, and I'm going to start auditioning samples and then looking at this analyzer here to see if it fits what I'm looking for. Okay, so this sample here, I can see it's covering that bass frequency response that I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this into my project and put it into audio. Now this goes on to my second tip for this tutorial, which is tuning the kick. Why is it important to tune your kick? Well, the reason for this is because if you're working, for example, in the key of C major, then what you want is your key of the kick to be in that same key. So I use the C major scale because it's all of the white notes. So ideally, we'd want our kick to be in the key of any of those notes within the C major scale, perhaps the root note, which would be C. So how do you find the key of your kick? Well, there are several ways to do it, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I am going to be using Voxengo Span again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up. And the great thing with Voxengo Span is no matter where you put the mouse on the frequency spectrum, it gives you also the key. So for example, at 98 Hertz, it's a G2. And so forth, as you can see when I'm moving my mouse. So I'm going to let the sample play, and then I'm going to look at where the resonating frequency of the sample is to determine what the key of this kick drum is. So from the information highlighted in the frequency analyzer, I can tell that this key of kick is at C2. So therefore I'll be okay to work in the key of C. Now if the key of your track isn't in C, then you can tune your kick. One advice that I would give is to try and not move the pitch of your kick too high or too low, as this can create kind of glitchy noises. But because I am working in the key of C, this kick works perfectly fine. To tune your kick, if you're working in Logic, there are ways you can do this. You can go and select the sample and go into your region mode, and then you can use the transpose function to raise the kick by whatever key you require. So if you know that your kick is already in the key of C, if you was to transpose it by, for example, +1, this would be C sharp, and then 2, this would be D. But I won't go too much into this, as this is more of a music theory topic. Tip number 3, root versus dominant. If you have a track where the bass is playing the root key, for example a C, then something that sometimes sounds good is when your kick drum plays 5 steps in the scale above the root note of the bass. Let's say, for example, your bass is playing the root of C. Then to have the key of the kick in G harmonically could work well with your bass guitar or bass, whichever you're using. So I am going to demonstrate this. So the key of this kick is in C, and I'm going to create a quick 4-on-the-4 loop of this kick drum. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have my bass playing the key, or note rather, of C. And for this I'll use the retro synthesizer in Logic. I'm just going to load up a quick preset and find something that will work well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the pitch of my kick to G, which is the 5th note in the scale of C major. So in the transpose function here, I'm going to go to +7. And then here, I'm going to quickly record a root note of C in the bass. And quickly quantize that. So because I have the key of my bass on C and the kick 5 steps up in the scale, it's creating quite a nice harmonic sound. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bring down the kick to the same note as my bass, and probably what we're going to hear is that it starts to muddy up a bit more as the kick and the bass are playing the same note. So this is with the kick and the bass playing the same note. Now I'm going to raise the kick to a G, which is 5 steps higher in the C major scale to the root note of C played on the bass. So as you can see, or rather hear, this gives a bit more space between the kick and the bass together, which is important, as when it comes to kick and bass, you have to decide which element is going to be taking up more of the low frequencies, and on the other side, the other element will be more fundamental in a bit more of the higher frequencies, for example 80 Hz and above. For my next tip is the tail length of the kick. Now, the way to determine the tail length of a kick, there are audio units or VSTs which can show this. However, if we was actually to zoom in to our sample, we can actually see the tail length of this kick. And what I'm going to do for the purpose of this tutorial is I'm going to bounce out the bass to audio file so we can compare it in terms of tail length to the kick. So now we have our bass and our kick in terms of audio files. So if we zoom in, I can see that my kick tail length is slightly longer than the kick. Now, let's say, for example, you have a bass with a long tail. So that the kick and bass work well together, perhaps it would be better for the kick to have a shorter tail length to the bass and vice versa. If the kick had a longer tail length, then it would be better for our bass to have a shorter one. So for this example, it works well that our kick drum has a shorter tail length to our bass. And what we'll do is we'll have a listen to this whilst looking at the screen. Okay, so for the last tip in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at avoiding clicks within kick drum samples. So if you have a sample such as we do for this tutorial, I'm going to just create a loop here of this first instance of this sample within the arrangement. Now this kick has obviously been sampled well, and it doesn't actually have any clicks. But perhaps the sample that you're working with has a slight click noise at the end. One of the ways to get rid of this is to listen to where the click is and also visually be able to detect where it is. And what you can do is create a fade out. Now the way to do this within Logic is if we go over to this tool here, which is our bunch of tools, we can select the fade tool, and if we was to hold the end of the kick drum sample and press Command, we can create a little fade at the end and adjust the shape of it, and this will avoid any clicking noise. And it's obviously good practice to do this to all samples, so we can just sort of select them all and just zoom into one because it will all happen to all of them. And again, Command click and create the shape. So this is the top 5 tips for getting your kick to sound good in your mix. What I'm going to do before I end this tutorial is I'm now going to show you on a frequency analyzer the kick and the bass working together. So as we can hear, the bass is taking up most of the low end, and the kick drum is more on the high end. So the kick drum is now sitting at 80 to 100 Hertz, whereas the bass is sort of sitting at 70, which is not too bad. They are still conflicting with each other, but so far so good. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope these tips have helped you to be able to get a better kick drum sample or a better kick for your mix. Remember guys, it's always about pre-preparation. When producing, we sometimes want to get straight into it, and we will select any kick drum until we find the sound or the chord progression or arrangement that we're looking for. Now that's totally fine, but bear in mind you do want your kick and bass to work well with each other, and these 5 tips here should hopefully help you with that and get your track to sound a lot more better. Thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope it's helped you out. Hit the subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on future uploads. Drop a comment if you have any questions, and if you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and hopefully see you in the next one.